Number 10. Cleopatra the Seventh. Cleopatra is one of the most well-known names when it comes to ancient queens and kings of Egypt, but did you know that Cleopatra we're seeing referenced in numerous film adaptations was actually the 7th Cleopatra, not the 1st or 2nd or 3rd or 4th. 7th. Egypt's last active pharaoh, born in 69 BC, was the 3rd child to Ptolemy XII. The Ptolemaic dynasty, the Macedonian Greek royal family, originally had its ties to Alexander the Great, so they were ruling Egypt for a long time. Male rulers took the name Ptolemy and queens were, well, Cleopatra. Her lineage runs deep in the heart of Egypt, but Cleopatra, fun fact, was, number 9, not Egyptian. Sure, she may have been born in Egypt, but Cleopatra, despite what many believe, was not. She was the last Greek ruler of Egypt, and after Alexander the Great's death in 323 BCE, Ptolemy then took over Egypt, which in turn launched this wave, this dynasty of Greek rulers lasting for centuries. DNA-wise, she was barely Egyptian, but as she grew up, she was determined to learn Egyptian ways, and due to political structure, she started to style herself as the goddess Isis. She was the first Cleopatra that claimed to be Isis after the 3rd Cleopatra. Yeah, there's a lot more Cleopatras than you thought. Number 8. Family problems. When Ptolemy VII died back in 51 BC, naturally the throne was passed down to his son, Ptolemy VIII, and of course Cleopatra VII. So both children were assigned to the throne, Cleopatra only being 18 and her brother being 10 years old. So Cleopatra became the main bread and butter. She was the ruler, and in typical ancient fashion, the two had to get married. You gotta keep it in the family. A couple years passed, and with Cleopatra trying to run the show, little brother wasn't having it. Or rather, her husband and co-ruler wasn't having it. Eventually, Cleopatra was pushed out of Alexandria, and her greed for power over her little brother, equally a co-ruler, had her completely driven out. But don't fret, she's coming back to Alexandria soon, and she's got a really cool idea of how to sneak back in the front doors with her new man, but I'll get to that later on. Number 7. Love and power. It's often thought that Cleopatra just married her brothers, more than one, got power, and then charmed Caesar and Mark Antony and then Bob's your uncle. Well, she wasn't really down for any of this. She didn't seek this lifestyle out per se, nor did her 10-year-old brother. I'm sure it wasn't ideal to be that stressed out when you're that young. I got a flat bike tire at 10. I didn't get Egypt. Know what I mean? Cleopatra once said as the goddess Isis, the most Egyptian of gods, married her brother Osiris, so in the process of becoming Egyptian, that is, becoming the ruling house of Egypt, although by lineage we were pure Macedonian Greek, we Ptolemies adopted some ancient Egyptian customs that others found shocking. One was brother-sister marriage, as the pharaohs had done earlier. Thus my mother and father were actually half-siblings, and I was forced in turn to marry my brothers, although it was a marriage in form only. Her relationship had true political advantage, but the way she felt about Julius Caesar was true. He had truly earned her love, not just lust. Not only would I never harm him, but I would kill anyone who tried to. Damn, ride or die. Nobody prepared me to feel so fiercely loyal to him and so instantly bound. Number 6. Julius Caesar. Nicknamed the Bald's Adulterer, which is now my new favorite diss ever, Julius Caesar had a history of his own, and his, rather than family and power, was lust. He was known to hook up with tons of people and to get them to fall in love with him just so he could use their power. So of course the two crossed paths. In October 50 BCE, Cleopatra had been kicked out pretty much of the family, so she fled to Syria, but she kept busy. She established an army and returned 2 years later to face her brother. At the same time now, the Roman general Pompey was taken out, plus the arrival of one Julius Adulterer Bald Caesar. The air was calm, it was peaceful for a hot minute, and Cleopatra knew that during this time she needed all the support she could get, specifically now from the Romans. At the same time, Caesar was looking to collect debts from Cleopatra's father, so they both felt the need for each other in some way. It was a match made in heaven.
Number 5. The Lost Labyrinth. Archaeologists uncovered what's believed to be the remains of a long-lost labyrinth below the sand of the Pyramid of Hawara, known as, quote, the Labyrinth. Built by Amenhotep III, it was the most visited sites of the ancient world. Greek Herodotus claimed to have counted 3,000 rooms in the pyramid's funeral complex during the 5th century BC. According to them, the underground temple consists of over 3,000 rooms filled with remarkable hieroglyphics and paintings. Close, too, located less than 100 kilometers from Cairo. In 2008, with the aid of ground-penetrating technology, a Belgian-Egyptian expedition was able to confirm the presence of an enormous underground temple, with With no visible remains, the story was thought to be a legend passed down until Egyptologists uncovered its foundations in the 1800s. The results of this expedition indicate the presence of grid-like structures deep beneath the sand. Please tell me there's no minotaur just running around down there. Okay. Number 4. The Mystery Queen. Archaeologists have unearthed a tomb of a previously unknown queen believed to have been the wife of Pharaoh Nefertiti, who ruled 4,500 years ago. The tomb was discovered in Abu Sur, an old kingdom necropolis southwest of Cairo, where there are several pyramids dedicated to the pharaohs of the 5th dynasty. The name of his wife had not been known until recently. She was Khenta-Khaz, renowned as the mother of 2 Egyptian pharaohs. Khenta-Khaz I is a mysterious woman who ruled in the 4th dynasty and has archaeologists puzzled at her burial complex in Giza. Though rough evidence for ancient Egyptian queens, the remains of this female leader were undisturbed for 2 millennia within the necropolis until its excavation in the late 1930s. Hieroglyphic inscriptions concerning her title had been discovered and subsequently became open for interpretation. Her title was initially regarded to be, quote, King of Upper and Lower Egypt and, quote, Mother of King of Upper and Lower Egypt. So who was this mysterious, powerful figure in ancient Egypt? Who was she? Number 3. The Dendrolites. All these tombs and underground chambers, how the hell did they see anything under there? Well, we really don't know, but we have some sort of direction. These ancient battery-looking light bulbish things could have maybe been the power source. Ancient Egypt seems to be full of keyholes, drill holes, and shafts that are literally impossible without high-powered tools. Most people say aliens, me included, but I also say the Dendera light bulbs. They've been theorized as being some sort of battery. The Hathor temple at Dendera contains several relief depictions Harsamtus in the form of a snake emerging from a lotus flower. The Dendera light is a variation of this motive, showing Harsamtus in an oval container, a snake inside taking a number of humans to lift, and it holds apparent meanings of the start of creation. Look, I don't care what you say, this thing is a light bulb. It's got a filament. And coils? Come on, drill holes? They couldn't have just lit fires underground? The smoke? The heat? I don't think so. Now, a couple of DeWalts. Just sanding up the pyramids real nice, you know? Who knows? Who knows? Number 2. The City of Punt. The land of Punt, or the ancient city of Punt, was an ancient kingdom sometime back then. A trading partner of ancient Egypt. It was known for producing and exporting gold, aromatic resins, precious stones, black wood, ivory, you name it. The region is known from ancient Egyptian records of trade expeditions. At time, Punt is referred to as the Land of God. No pressure, archaeologists. The exact location of Punt is debated and unknown by historians. Cue Indiana Jones movie. Various locations have been offered: southeast of Egypt, a Red Sea coastal region, Somalia, Ethiopia, Sudan. No one really knows. First deciphered in Egyptian hieroglyphics in 1822, scholars began reading Egyptian texts and the mystery got mystery. That's not a word. More questions arose as to where Punt was located and what happened to it. The land of Punt is written by voyagers as being praised for its lavish riches and goodness of land. Okay, so it exists somewhere. This is awesome, isn't it? Would it suck if we already found everything? We're going on an expedition, boy. Grab your things, let's go. And coming in at the number 1 spot, the Sphinx. Where do I even start? Known as the oldest carved rock ever, its age is debated literally every day due to the questions it asks scholars. Was it wind erosion? Water erosion? How many times was this thing broken and rebuilt? The Great Sphinx of Giza, the limestone statue of a reclining sphinx, a mythical creature with a head of a human and the body of a lion. Facing directly west to east, it stands on the Giza Plateau on the west bank of the Nile. The face of the Sphinx appears to represent the pharaoh Khafra, although this is heavily debated as wrong gears and looking nothing like him. It's since been restored with tons of layers of limestone blocks. Although still unfixed, its nose was broken off for unknown reasons between the 3rd and 10th century. Maybe some artillery fire over the years, who knows. The Sphinx is the oldest known sculpture in Egypt, and archaeologists suggest that it was created in the Old Kingdom using unknown construction methods. Yeah, definitely that battery thing. From 1817 to 1930, this thing was buried up to its neck and written and drawn about for centuries. I wonder what other secrets lay under her right now. I guess we'll eventually find out someday. I wonder what else is just waiting to be dug up, you know? Imagine they find a cell phone.
At number 10, Inventions. Leonardo da Vinci was quite the smarty pants. We all know him mostly for his paintings, however he was so much more than just a mere artiste. Da Vinci was famous for his designs and art, as well as cartography, geology, and other studies. What's most impressive about Da Vinci are his inventions, because he drew or described a number of devices that wouldn't be fully realized until centuries later. Some of his inventions include an underwater diving suit, like a scuba suit, an armored tank, a calculator, the machine gun, a keyboard, construction crane, a robot, and a flying machine. We have all of these things today, but back in Da Vinci's time, these inventions were quite bold. Leonardo conceptualized the armored tank 400 years before this invention was actually realized and used in World War I. Many of Da Vinci's inventions went unpublished during his life, and his notes and inventions were just passed on and created without giving Da Vinci credit, but as we find more and more of Da Vinci's lost notes, we are seeing just how many things he was inventing and how he's shaped our world so significantly. I wonder what other things Leo invented that we don't know about. At number 9, his lovers. Not much is known about Leonardo da Vinci's personal life. We know that he was never married, but that doesn't mean that the artist didn't have a love life. It is believed that Da Vinci had a couple of lovers throughout his life, but there's no solid proof, only speculation and theories. Though we may never know for certain what his sexuality was, there are theories that suggest that Da Vinci was into men. Many people believe that at one point Da Vinci had some kind of relationship with his mentor, Andrea del Verrocchio, outside of their mentor-mentee partnership. There is also speculation that 2 of Da Vinci's students were also his lovers. Gian Giacomo Caprotti and Francesco Melzi both joined Da Vinci's atelier when they were 10 and 15 respectively, but it is believed that there were romantic ties between them. Caprotti is thought to have been Da Vinci's favorite, and he even left Caprotti a mysterious inheritance in his will when he died. Back in Renaissance Italy, homosexuality was illegal, so if they were really Leonardo's lovers, they would have needed to keep things very secret. There was a report filed against Da Vinci alluding to his sexuality, but because they were anonymous, the charges against the artist were dropped. Before we carry on talking about the mysterious life of Leonardo da Vinci, let me first take a moment to ask you guys to consider leaving a like on this video if you're enjoying it so far, and maybe even consider subscribing to the channel to see more videos like this one. At number 8, Mona Lisa smirk. For some reason, people for years have been so obsessed with the Mona Lisa and her mysterious smirk. I mean, I don't really get what's so mysterious about it, but apparently it has been a hot topic in the art world. For years, people have been trying to piece together who Mona Lisa was and why she was smiling like that. Scans of the famous paintings have revealed many secrets, and countless scientists took a stab at trying to crack the case on this whole Mona Lisa mystery, but it seems like one person is thought to have figured out why Mona Lisa looks the way she does. Dr. Mandeep R. Mehra, a physician from Boston, was standing in line to view the painting when he noticed her, quote, sallow complexion, thinning hair, and misaligned smile, end quote. It was then that he diagnosed the woman in the painting with hypothyroidism. He suggested that her odd smile could have been connected to muscle weakness caused by her potential hypothyroidism. This, combined with her thin and receding hairline, a bump next to her left eye, lack of eyebrow hair, yellow skin, and bump on her neck, suggested that she was suffering from this glandular condition. To back up this theory, research was done on food that women would have eaten at the time that this painting was done, and because they ate a relatively iodine-deficient diet, this could have caused the development of hypothyroidism, since iodine is essential in maintaining thyroid health. At number 7, his mother. As I mentioned earlier, Da Vinci's personal life had its own mysteries. One of the greater mysteries from Leonardo da Vinci's life is his mother. No one really knows who she was or where she came from, but there are a handful of theories. What we do know of his early life is that Leonardo was born on April 15, 1452. His father was Piero, a Florentine notary who was a famous womanizer, and his mother was Caterina. But other than her name, not much else is known about Caterina. The reason we don't know much about her is because she really wasn't in Leonardo's life. She spent little time with him, and she sent him to live with his father. Historians have been able to narrow down a couple of people who could have been Leonardo's mother. She could have been Caterina de Mio de Lippo, who was a pauper from a neglected farm, or she could have been Caterina di Antonio di Cambio, who was the daughter of small landowners. It is also theorized that Caterina could have been a former slave from the Middle East because the name Caterina was a common name among women who converted to Catholicism, and since analysis of Leonardo's fingerprint indicated traits commonly found in people of Arabic descent, this could actually back up that theory. At number 6, The Last Supper. Many of Leonardo da Vinci's paintings are shrouded in mystery. There are many mysteries surrounding the Mona Lisa, other than the one I previously mentioned, and there are a couple of other pieces with a lot of unanswered questions, but let me tell you about one of the mysteries surrounding da Vinci's The Last Supper. The Last Supper is a depiction of Jesus and his disciples at the last Passover meal before Jesus' crucifixion. Though it looks like a normal painting, there are hidden Easter eggs that raise some questions. Dan Brown, the author of the Da Vinci Code, came up with a theory that Mary Magdalene is depicted in the painting. Mary Magdalene is thought to have potentially been Jesus' wife, and according to Dan Brown, the disciple in the painting that was previously identified as John was actually Mary Magdalene because this person had softer features that could be perceived as feminine. There is a counter-argument to this theory, saying that the softer features in the painting were more so to depict the youth of the disciple John because he was the youngest of Jesus' disciples. But what do you guys think? Is there actually merit to this theory?
Number 5, Isis Reborn. The Greeks called her Acid. She is an acid. I don't know. God of the Moon, the goddess of life and magic, a protector to women and children. Yes, the goddess of the moon was quite important to Egyptian mythology. What if you could convince the people that you were a god? What if you were actually the goddess of magic and healing and a protector of the women and children? Anyone who works for PR can tell you how important self-image is, especially when you're the gal in charge. Statues of the goddess Asit were made in Cleopatra's likeness, and her public image became that of an all-important goddess. I wish I was the goddess of healing and magic, but I'll settle for King of the Hive.
Number 4, drinking buddies. So, after her last Roman boyfriend got, Cleopatra found a new lover in the Roman general Mark Antony. While it was a political move to have protection, it was also because they genuinely enjoyed each other's company. They even had a drinking club, which honestly would be kind of cute if it wasn't for the scandals and war, and honestly pretty much everything else. The inimitable livers is what they called themselves, and they spent the winter of 40 and 41 BC living it up, drinking and feasting almost every night. They had games and contests, and apparently these two lovebirds would dress up in disguises and go out into Alexandria and play pranks on people. Now that is actually pretty cute, I won't lie. Pretty cute.
Number 3, theatrics. When I was a young lad in every classroom I was ever in, the teacher, no matter how young or old, had a variation of this to say to me. Nice teachers would say this: Andrew, you have a lot of energy. Let's try and focus. The mean teachers would say, shut up and read your book. What am I getting at here? Well, in my mind, just because it was math class, that didn't mean it wasn't a stand-up comedy stage. Just how it goes. Cleopatra also felt this in her heart. No, not comedy, theater, or drama, just being extra, very extra. The whole revealing yourself by unraveling a rug is the definition of theater. There's also the whole Elizabeth Taylor connection. If you've ever seen the movie Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor, then you know what I'm talking about. This also could be directly because of that, and for those who think Cleopatra, they probably think of Elizabeth Taylor, which is very,
Number 2, Forever Young. You know, for all the things she did and who she was in history, Cleopatra did not live an incredibly long life. She actually only lived to be 39, dying in 30 BC. She brought the end of an era, one that had been around since 3100 BC. The line of pharaohs was Egypt's way of life for over 3,000 years, and Cleopatra left us only 2,051 years ago. This isn't so much a mysterious point about Cleopatra, it's more like a mysterious point about Egypt and pharaohs in general. What is cool is that for the last 300 years before Cleopatra VII, her family had spoke only Greek, and the very last one in their line, the very last pharaoh of Egypt, who closed out a 3,000-year-long tradition, was the first and last Ptolemaic ruler who decided to actually learn how to speak Egyptian and who embraced the Egyptian culture that she was the ruler of.
Number 1, rumors and hearsay. Look, we've talked about a lot of stuff here on this list, but the trouble is we can't be too sure of what is true and what's Hollywood. The classical historical equation of a long time ago plus not enough primary sources of information multiplied by 2 cute internet hosts, well, we just don't know. We'd love to bring you the cold hard history facts with just a sprinkle of funny in there, but this list was difficult. So if you guys know anything about Cleopatra and her mysteries, please share. I'd love to hear it. Let us know in the comments below. But the truth is, there's just a lot of mystery surrounding the gal. That's just how it goes.
Number 10, history. ruling alongside the pharaoh Akhenaten from 1353 to 1336 BC. Queen Nefertiti, aka the Lady of Grace, aka Hereditary Princess, was born in 1370 BCE. She was born in the Egyptian city of Thebes, and she was only 15 years old when she married the 16-year-old Akhenaten. She worshipped the sun god Aten, and alongside her young husband, she built a new capital city called Amarna, and she also created a new religion, so how's that? She ruled over what's considered the wealthiest period in Egypt history. Nefertiti had 6 children, which were all daughters, which may have had something to do with why we don't know much about her today, but I'll get into that much later on. Number 9, her death. After changing Egypt's religious and political structure, soaring to new heights as a woman in the Egyptian court, the queen just vanished, just like that. And on this video, we're going to try and figure out what may have happened to her. During the 12th year of the 17 that her husband ruled for, historical records seem to have just wiped out the queen's legacy. She was gone from everything. Many believe that she didn't actually die, but rather she disguised herself and continued to rule. The next in line after Akhenaten's reign was the pharaoh Smenkhare. Was that really Nefertiti in disguise? I hope so. That would be pretty sweet if we proved that and figured that out. I'm really rooting for that. The reason we believe that she may have disguised herself as a man is because of the female pharaoh Hatshepsut, because they ruled with a fake beard in the 15th century. It's known that they had a big traditional fake beard. It's cool. It's like kind of flashy. I kind of want one. I can't grow a beard or a mustache, so I kind of want a fake one myself. Lastly, there's a theory that the reason Nefertiti was banished was because she couldn't produce a male heir. We've gotten closer to uncovering the truth though recently in 2015, when Nicholas Reeves and Mamdouh El-Damadi found what they think is a hidden doorway in King Tut's tomb that contains perhaps the sarcophagus of the lost queen. I'll get into that shortly, but first we need to talk about her modern day origins. Number 8. Berlin bust. Perhaps one of the most popular ancient sculptures of all time was found on December 6, 1913. German archaeologist Ludwig Borchardt found this on the floor of the Royal Sculptors Workshop. This figure has some unforgettable details. I mean, first of all, she's breathtaking to look at, and the blue headpiece. These are all important. It was clear that this was Queen Nefertiti from the start. The German team split everything with the Egyptian government, so currently this bust is being held in Berlin. It draws in about 50,000 visitors a year to Berlin's newest museum, a little piece of Egypt all the way over there. We love it. Now, fun little fact about this modern bust, in 2009 there were scans done to it, technology, nice, and it's revealed that underneath this painted layer is limestone carving of a woman so detailed that you can see wrinkles in her cheeks, even a bump on her nose as well. That's like 4K Egypt, it's crazy. Back in 2016, these two artists secretly 3D scanned the bust of the lost queen and then straight up released the files online as a free download. The future is here, I guess. Also, that's a little invasive. Just scanning your head, like that's really? But 3 years later, officials decided to release that to the public, so here it is, take a look. The Queen Nefertiti 3D bust, scanned by James Bond secretly. Number 7, Monuments Men. It wasn't always a smooth ride for this specific bust. Sometimes it was a bust. I had to, why not? She spent 11 years in the private residence of Germany's expedition founder, Jacques Simon. Cut to 9 years later, that's when King Tut's tomb was discovered, a totally separate event, unbeknownst to them, connected. Howard Carter found King Tut's tomb in 1922, and of course afterwards, the entire world was watching. Just a year later, her bust was finally moved to Berlin. It had a rocky go. It remained in Germans' hands throughout the entire war. Even that big ugly dude with a little mustache said that he himself would never relinquish the head of the queen. So thanks, Spittler. I can't say his name because YouTube. It was hidden in a salt mine throughout the entire Cold War. The Germans would arrive too late though sometimes when stealing rich pieces of art. Like in 1940, for example, they arrived at the Louvre and it was bare. The Mona Lisa was now in a child's bedroom. Curators had moved the pieces, thankfully. But when a bust of a long-lost queen of Egypt was being held in a salt mine in the town of Merkers, the Monuments Men literally saved history. When Sergeant Kenneth C. Lindsay led his team down the 35 miles of tunnel, and aside from the queen's bust, billions of dollars of gold was also found down there, all stolen from the Germans. Number 6. Hidden chamber. Ancient Egyptian architecture is mind-blowing. Even to this day, we're trying to figure out how exactly everything was built. More and more secrets are coming out of all these hidden tombs. It's fascinating. Technology is for sure a helping hand when it comes to learning about our past queens and kings. And for Queen Nefertiti, her final resting place is now believed to be in a secret chamber in King Tut's tomb. This was years ago. Egypt Tourist Minister Hisham Zazou said the discovery was like a big bang. And I see no lies. It's perhaps one of the biggest discoveries of the 21st century. After radar tests were conducted, Egyptian officials were 90% sure they found a hidden chamber. And it was also also full of treasures, so that's neat. And also, we're onto something.
In 5th place, we have the mysterious Roanoke Colony. In 1587, 121 colonists led by John White arrived on Roanoke Island in what would be present-day North Carolina to establish a colony. As tensions mounted with the local population, John White opted to return to England to gather reinforcements and supplies. But when he returned several years later, the settlement was completely deserted with no signs of a struggle and no remains to be found anywhere. The settlement became known as the Lost Colony, and none of its members were ever seen again. In 4th place, time to talk about Jimmy Hoffa. Known for his involvement in organized crime, Jimmy disappeared in Oakland County, Michigan on July 30th of 1975 and was declared legally dead in 1982. The identity of his killer, or killers, and the location of his body are ongoing mysteries. Police and forensic anthropologists have searched a number of sites in Detroit and Oakland County to no avail. Most recently, on October 25th and 26th of 2021, FBI agents visited a former landfill in New Jersey to conduct a site survey, following a deathbed confession by a landfill worker claiming that people had trusted him and his father with burying Hoffa's body in a steel barrel under the dump in 1975. The agents apparently didn't find this steel barrel. The identity of his killer is also unclear. Before his death in 2006, Richard the Iceman Kuklinski, a hitman, claimed to have ended Jimmy and dumped his body in a scrapyard, but a number of police officers have casted their doubt on the confession. As the years go by, it appears increasingly unlikely that Hoffa's remains or his actual killer will ever be found. In 3rd place, we have the missing tomb of Cleopatra. If you're unaware of her legacy, Cleopatra was queen of Egypt from 51 to 30 BC and its last active ruler. When she realized her kingdom was about to be no longer, she refused to become a Roman prisoner and ended her own life. Popular belief is that she allowed an asp or Egyptian cobra to bite and poison her. Now, no venomous snake was found with her body, but she did have tiny puncture wounds on her arm that could have been caused by a needle. After her passing, Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire, marking the end of the last Hellenistic state in the Mediterranean. Unlike other famous monarchs from that time period, attempts to find her tomb, where she is buried next to her beloved Antony, have never been successful. Excavations carried out by Kathleen Martinez have yielded 10 mummies and 27 tombs of Egyptian nobles, as well as coins bearing images of Cleopatra and carvings showing her and her lover in an embrace. So far though, the tomb itself remains elusive, but temple excavations continue, with additional sites below the surface identified using ground-penetrating radar since around 2011. In 2nd place, we have the disappearance of Amelia Earhart. She was an American aviation pioneer, being the first female aviator to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. She set many other records and was one of the first aviators to promote commercial air travel, wrote best-selling books about her flying experiences, along with being instrumental in the formation of the 99s, an organization for female pilots. On July 2nd of 1937, Amelia Earhart flew towards Howland Island, one of the last stops on her attempt to be the first woman to fly around the world. Nearing the tiny Pacific island, she radioed the Itasca, a United States Coast Guard cutter anchored off of Howland's coast, to ask it to guide her onto land with radio signals, saying, "We must be on you but cannot see you, gas is running low, been unable to reach you by radio, we're flying at 1,000 feet. Earhart's last confirmed message indicated that she was flying on a northwest to southeast navigational line that bisected the island, but she did not indicate in which direction she was heading. After that communication at 8:43 a.m., several expedition sends have tried to locate the plane's wreckage, but have had zero luck. By studying Amelia's final radio transmissions and calculating what is known about the plane's fuel supply, researchers have narrowed their search to a 630 square mile area of the ocean. Theories about what happened have ranged in extremes, from simply crashing and sinking, to being captured and held as a war prisoner, living as castaways that were never found, that it was a government cover-up, or she simply restarted her life in anonymity. Feel free to post your favorite theory in the comments. I'd love to know. And in 1st place, we have Jack the Ripper. What? I thought I'd end today on an easy note, something we can all fall asleep to. Jack the Ripper was an unidentified serial killer active in and around the Whitechapel district of London, England in the autumn of 1888. Attacks from Jack the Ripper typically involved female ladies of the night who lived and worked in the slums of the East End of London. Their throats were cut prior to abdominal mutilations, and the removal of internal organs from at least 3 of the victims led to speculation that their killer had some sort of anatomical or surgical knowledge. Rumors that the deaths were connected intensified solidified in September and October of 1888, and numerous letters were received by media outlets and Scotland Yard from individuals claiming to be the Ripper. The From Hell letter, received by George Lusk of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, came with half a preserved human kidney, allegedly taken from one of the victims. Extensive newspaper coverage bestowed widespread and enduring international notoriety on the Ripper, and the legend solidified. The concentration of killings around weekends and public holidays, and within a short distance of each other, has indicated to many that the Ripper was in regular employment and lived locally. Others have vehemently stated that the killer was an educated upper-class man, possibly a doctor or an aristocrat, who ventured into Whitechapel from a more well-to-do area. The killings were never solved, and the legends surrounding these crimes became a combination of historical research, folklore, and pseudo-history, capturing public imagination until this day.
Number 10. Construction. We can't talk about ancient Egypt and the mysteries still unsolved there if we don't start on how the hell these things were built. And also, it's not just like 3 pyramids. There's 118 of these things. When did they have time to construct all of these? Ropes? Pulley systems? Yeah, I'm not convinced. Ramps? Ramps would have been a mile long against the pyramid's height. That's like hundreds of years right there. You ever dug a hole in your backyard? 2 feet. It's like 6 hours right there. And a sore back. Some have theorized a water hydraulic system was used to transport the carved rocks up slopes and tubes with tidal power. Okay, better. But like, how did they line up the rocks so perfectly and so square at the top? 1 inch off and every carpenter knows that's gonna shift everything. Also, the alignment to true north, the odd coincidences with the dimensions resembling the cosmos, they couldn't have known back then, you know? Buckle up, it's only gonna get weirder. Number 9, Chamber of Secrets. In 2017, scientists were able to peek inside the Great Pyramid finally using modern day physics. Particles, actually. What they found revealed numerous hidden secret chambers and rooms that were thought to never exist. The most bizarre discoveries was a massive unknown void nearly 100 feet long that lays just above the pyramid's grand gallery. Khufu, also known as the Great Pyramid, was received the most attention due to its size and age, but it wasn't the only chamber they found. Now, gold, mummies, manuscripts, ancient technology, what lies inside these voids? Also, how the hell did they floor and roof a room that's inaccessible? How do you build that inside such a small chamber already? Muon tomography uses cosmic rays of muons and generates a 3D image through nearly any material. This technology is groundbreaking, literally. Yep, found it, there it is. Number 8, the Saqqara Temple. The Pyramid of Djoser, also known as the Step Pyramid, is an archaeological site in the Saqqara necropolis. The discovery of a 4,400-year-old tomb, now seen as UNESCO's World Heritage Site, is the 6-tier, 4-sided structure, which very well may be the earliest colossal stone structure in Egypt, and possibly the world. Stone mounds were made in Europe for millennia, but it was the pyramid shape that started here. It was built 27th century BC during the 3rd dynasty for the pharaoh Djoser. The pyramid is the center of a huge complex and an enormous courtyard surrounded by ceremonial structures and decorations. Its architect was created from the Egyptian architect himself, Imhotep, the high priest of the god Ra. This guy was like the building manager, you know? The head architect. In fact, wasn't even found or really even studied till about the 1920s, and was recently excavated in 2018. The pyramid went through several revisions over the years, and in March 2020, the pyramid was officially reopened for visitors after a 14-year fix-up. Check out Netflix, they do a great documentary on this. Number 7, Queen Nefertiti, the queen of the 18th dynasty of ancient Egypt, the beloved royal wife of Pharaoh Akhenaten. Nefertiti and her husband were known for a religious revolution in which they worshipped solely the sun disk Aten as their one and only god. Oh! Blasphemy! She reigned during what was arguably the wealthiest and most lavish period of ancient Egypt. Here's the weird part. We don't know where she is. Usually kings and queens are buried in very spiritual, very high-ranked places like the royal tomb. Easy to find. But nope, no one can find her, or even know what happened to her. In 2015, archaeologists thought, with high-resolution scans, voids that are behind the walls of Tutankhamun's tomb proposed maybe that she was there. Nope, no Nefertiti. In 2003, archaeologists thought through the hair DNA, Nefertiti's mummy may have been, quote, the younger lady. Nope. Turns out it was just Tutankhamun's mom. So what exactly happened to this famously revered queen? Who knows? Aliens, dude. When in doubt, always aliens. You know what I mean? Number 6, King Tut's death. When archaeologists opened a sarcophagus in Egypt's Valley of the Kings for the first time in 1923, it was the discovery of a lifetime. the ancient Egyptian boy king, King Tutankhamun, the burial chamber of the 19-year-old who ruled 3,300 years ago. But why did he die so young? DNA tests and CT scans show he suffered from malaria, a broken leg, and congenital deformities associated with inbreeding, common amongst royalty. Ouch. Because of his tomb's extremely small size, historians think King Tut's death must have been unexpected, and his burial rushed by A, who succeeded him as a pharaoh. The tomb's chambers were packed to the brim with more than 5,000 artifacts including furniture, chariots, clothes, weapons, and 130 of the king's walking sticks. A 24-pound solid gold mask was placed over him, and he was laid in a series of containers, 3 golden coffins, and a granite sarcophagus. His death still has scientists scratching their heads. Also, look up how many archaeologists died months after the cursed tomb had been raided. Yeah, you don't want to know.
At number 5, Mayan creationism. Whether you believe in evolution or creationism, no one really knows for sure how the world began. There are a number of theories from both sides, but again, it's such a huge notion that it's next to impossible to know where everything began. Every culture has their theory, and the Mayans were no exception, and they even came up with their own story for the creation of life. The Mayans believed that the Earth was created in 3114 BCE, and this date coincides with the beginning of the Mayan calendar. According to their mythology, the world was created in 4 parts. First came the animals, then wet clay, then wood, and then finally humans, which were said to be made out of maize, which is essentially corn. They believed that all of this was created by artisan gods who crafted the earth and the heavens like sculptures. It's a pretty cool story, but again, we will never know if their theory was actually true. At number 4, afterlife. For the Mayans, their version of the afterlife was quite intense and complex. They thought of the afterlife as a soul's journey to paradise, but there was also no guarantee that said soul would actually reach eternal peace. First, a person's soul would have to pass through a terrifying underworld that was said to be the home of frightening deities who had names like Bloody Teeth, Flying Scab, and Bloody Claw. Already quite scary, right? Thankfully, not everyone had to endure this terrifying journey to the underworld. Those who were exempt were victims of sacrifice, women who died in childbirth, those killed in warfare, and people who died playing the game Pocketalk, which was their bloodiest sport. So really, you had to earn your death in this culture, otherwise your journey to the afterlife would be brutal. Which makes a lot of sense as to why death and sacrifice was such a huge part of their culture, because no one wanted to die a lame death and have to face Bloody Teeth and Bloody Claw in the afterlife. Even though some Mayan souls were believed to have found their way to paradise, they also believed that life was a never-ending cycle going from life to death and back again, so even if you did reach paradise, you might not have stayed there for long before being thrown right back into the circle of life once again. At number 3, burial rituals. On the topic of Mayan death beliefs and rituals, we should talk about their mysterious burial rituals as well. For the Mayans, death was a big part of life, and when you were laid to rest, that wasn't the end of your burial ritual. While your soul was passing through either the underworld or paradise, things were still going on with your remains even years after your passing. The Mayans had tombs for their dead, they often wrapped the bodies, placed them in specific positions, and even provided the person with food for the afterlife. But even after their burial, the Mayans would often exhume their loved one's skeletal remains years later and paint them bright red, and this was especially common for key Mayan rulers and officials. But that's not the only way that they practiced ceremonial burials. Sometimes before being buried, they would cremate the person and the remains would be placed in decorative urns. It all just depended on the person and their level of importance in their society. At number 2, currency. Before I get into the ancient Mayan currency, I want you guys to leave a comment down below telling me what your currency is. I think it's so cool to see how many different types of currency there are around the world, so let me know yours. Now let's get into how Mayans paid for things. They used chocolate as their currency back in their heyday. The cacao bean was a big staple in Mayan culture, and they had been cultivating it for years. It became so important to them that they even created a deity devoted to the bean. They started off using the cacao bean as a food source, creating chocolate beverages and food, but soon the cacao bean evolved in their society, going from being something edible with bartering value to being a legitimate currency. There are ancient Mayan artworks that depict the cacao bean being used as money in their society, and it's just fascinating. Do you think that you would have liked to pay for things in chocolate? if that was a thing, I wouldn't have any money. And finally, at number 1, downfall. The biggest mystery that surrounds the ancient Mayan civilization is what the heck happened to them. To this day, no one quite knows for sure what happened to them and how their civilization died off. During the 8th and 9th centuries, the centers of the Mayan southern lowlands started to decline, and they were abandoned not too long afterwards. This decline was coupled with the decline of architectural advancements and construction. There are a few theories to explain what might have happened to the Mayans, like overpopulation, foreign invasion, peasant revolt, or even the collapse of key trade routes. More environmental explanations for the Mayans' decline include environmental disaster, sickness, or even climate change. Some research have even theorized that there was a 200-year drought that might have contributed to the civilization's collapse. Right now though, we have no idea. So by far the most mysterious thing that the Mayans did was disappear.
Number 10. Not all looks. History is written by the victors. In this case, the Romans, who liked to paint Cleopatra here as a sinful seductress in the night. And in a lot of our media, she is portrayed just that way. But that may have not been totally the case. At least, she wasn't all looks. According to historians, she was a scholar, and she enjoyed the company of other scholars. She probably knew a dozen different languages, and she was well versed in mathematics, philosophy, oratory, and astronomy. If that weren't enough, apparently it's possible she wasn't actually as attractive as we think. A lot of coins and some art display her with somewhat masculine features. I mean, maybe that was considered attractive. But some people believe these coins just show these features to make her look more powerful, as most rulers back in the day were men. She was a female pharaoh of Egypt. There's only a slim chance she was not an incredibly intelligent person. We just don't know for sure.
Number 9, the last pharaoh of Egypt. She was the last pharaoh of Egypt, and what may come as a surprise to some, she wasn't actually Egyptian. Okay, yes, she was born in Egypt, but she was of Macedonian descent. However, what's more mysterious than that is her passing. After a bunch of political misfortune that I'm sure Adam will get into at a later point, the last pharaoh that we knew, she was about to lose her kingdom, so in true dramatic form, she allowed 2 asps to bite her, releasing her from this mortal realm. This may or may not be true, something that has been spun up since her absence. Sure, there's truth in everything, but we'll never really know. One thing's for sure, she was a cunning leader and did whatever it took to be a leader.
Number 8. Sibling rivalry. Look, back in the day, power was something that drove people to do some not so savory things. Like turning on your brother husband and starting a civil war for sole possession of the throne, teaming up with the ruler of a much stronger empire, and taking out anyone who was your potential rival. And I don't mean taking them out on a date. Cleopatra may or may not have had a hand in the untimely demise of her first and second brother husbands, Ptolemy the 13th and 14th. The first for not letting her have full power, and the second one so that she could make her son co-ruler. But it doesn't stop there. She was almost definitely responsible for the execution of her sister Arsinoe. Brother husbands and non-accidental fatal incidents. I'm not really a fan of this.
Number 7, bedtime with Caesar. When I said she was a cunning warrior and would do whatever it takes to be a great leader, I meant it. Cleopatra knew how to control the politics around her and the men who held power. She gave the thing that all men can't resist. Yes, that's right. Throwing rocks in a river. It's our favorite pastime. We just love doing it. I don't know. I'm just kidding. It was actually all the other stuff like wealth, power, and the devil's bedroom dance. You know what I'm talking about. Cleopatra had the men wrapped around her finger. All was going great if it weren't for a little political strife in Rome. She ended up with Mark Antony, then Octavian, aka Augustus. He was on the rise to power. When the curtains closed, a republic had fallen, and an empire was here to stay for a long time. Long enough for a whiny teenager from Tosche Station to destroy a space station. Or something like that.
Number 6. Trendsetter. Maybe you knew, maybe you didn't, but in 44 BC, Cleopatra went back to Rome with Julius Caesar as his not-so-subtle side chick, bringing their not-so-subtly named son, Caesarion, with them. And while he was totally with Calpurnia at the time, he even built a statue for Cleopatra in the Temple of Venus. This was pretty scandalous and had a lot of people doing the side-eye emoji, but it also had a lot of people being like, damn, look at this Egyptian lady, look at her style, her hair, her clothes. Our girl Cleopatra had an impact on the fashion in Rome, even if she was only there for 2 years until her mans got punctured like a fresh new bubble tea, except he was punctured 22 more times. Number 5. Play that lyre to the fire. While we're talking about Nero, he actually has a mystery all of his own. Nero was very famously a fan of music. He would often sing and play instruments, and he was also a fan of being utterly insane. Ending lives and forcing people to party all night, have massive parties, and eat until they puked. So when you hear a rumor that this crazy emperor may have caused the Great Fire of Rome that destroyed a lot of the city on July 18th in the year 64, you might believe it. And you might even believe the rumor that he also played the lyre while the city burned. It just kind of all checks out for how crazy he is, but obviously we have no evidence of that actually happening. Neither of those two rumors can be proven, especially not now, 1,958 years later. What we do know is that the emperor did benefit quite a bit from the destruction the fire caused. It allowed him to change the aesthetics of the city, persecute thousands of Christians, and introduce new building codes. It also turns out Nero may have been 35 miles away in Antium, but I mean, prove it! You can't. I can't. Number 4. Ham Hill. Ham Hill in England is the location of an archaeological dig by the universities of Cambridge and Cardiff, where we made the crazy discovery of the graves of a lot of people, dating back to the time in history when Romans made their way into England. The part that is so alarming, other than finding a pile of corpses, is that these particular bodies had been stripped of their exterior layers and chopped up. It's gruesome. But oddly, most of the skeletons found here actually belonged to women, and most of which were women in their early 20s. But this wouldn't be a mystery if those were all the facts. We actually don't know what happened here. The obvious answer is some kind of mass life-ending escapade, but why, damn it, why? We don't know. Number 3. Hard Talker. Surprise! You've met the afterlife. Were you a good person? Well, if you weren't, if you were a threat to your community, say in ancient Rome, then it's pretty likely you would have been buried face down. So there, take that. Hold up, they cut out your tongue and put a stone in your mouth? What in the Gaius Octavius Caesarian, what is going on here? That's probably what the team who unearthed the grave of a man from a Northamptonshire site dating back to Roman Britain probably said. They found a man who was buried face down in his grave, missing his tongue with a stone in its place. Pretty odd. Infection in the bones of his jaw show it was removed while he was still alive. And the practice of replacing a missing body part with another object was definitely known to happen in Roman Britain, although it was rather rare. The only thing is we have absolutely no idea what this man had done. Maybe he just really talked too much. Maybe he lost his tongue to something completely unrelated to his delifing, and this stone was just to replace it. We don't actually know, and there is no evidence to tell us. Theories? Number 2. Skulls of London. I'm not really sure how this happens, how it was discovered, or anything, but in 1988, 39 skulls were excavated really close to the Museum of London in London. Those 39 skulls were alarming enough, but the 39 soon expanded into hundreds of skulls. Now, possible theories included that the skulls belonged to executed criminals, gladiators, or even soldiers that had done the Monty Python, run away! Most of the skulls seem to have been from men, and most indicated that they suffered rather brutal offings. Some people think the skulls were dumped in display pits. Some people think they were placed there purposely. To make matters worse, not too far away we also discovered what seems to be an ancient Roman cooking pot with bits of humans in it. All of this creepy stuff was found in an area no bigger than a swimming pool, which makes it very obvious that it was all a part of the same thing, possibly part of some crazy Roman cult. Maybe it's all just a big coincidence. We don't have the evidence to know. I don't think I could really tell you exactly what in the name of Mark Antony went on here, but I do know that it were not good. Number 1. Mole warfare. Who would have thought chemical warfare would make for a great story? Especially 2,000-year-old ancient chemical warfare. Back in the Roman city of Dura Europus in Syria, a siege took place between the Roman and the Persian forces. During said battle, the Persians dug siege tunnels underneath the walls of the Roman city. The Romans knew and built their own tunnels to cut them off. Problem with tunnels like that is you have absolutely no idea of where exactly the opposing team is going to show up. The Romans ended up building their tunnel higher than the Persians did, so you got like this kind of situation going on. Now, archaeological digs have discovered about 19 Roman soldiers in these tunnels. But it seems that these soldiers were not stabbed to cause their demise, but instead, they seem to have suffocated. Well, how the heck did that happen? According to archaeologist Simon James, he believes that the Persians actually allowed the Romans to dig into their tunnel, and then use the elevated position with a sort of chimney effect to set a mix of bitumen and sulfur on fire and let the fumes do the deed. But, and say it with me, there is absolutely no evidence of this. Yes, good, you've caught on. Very nice.
Kicking off today's list, we have the Bermuda Triangle, also referred to as the Devil's Triangle. It's an area between the coasts of Miami, Puerto Rico, and, you guessed it, Bermuda, that's been home to way too many disappearances by boat and by plane to be normal by my personal definition of the term. Historically speaking, the first notable disappearance was the HMS Atalanta in 1840, who disappeared with her entire crew after setting sail from the Royal Naval Dockyard, Bermuda, for Falmouth, England on January 31st. While it's presumed a storm was the reason for her fate, and the search for evidence attracted worldwide attention, nothing was ever found. If you'd prefer to talk about flights, on December 28th of 1948, a Douglas DC-3 aircraft disappeared while on a flight from San Juan, Puerto Rico to Miami. No trace of the aircraft or the, 32 people on board was ever found. More recently, in late July of 2015, two 14-year-old boys, Austin Stephanos and Perry Cohen, went on a fishing trip in their 19-foot boat. Despite the, 15,000 square nautical mile wide search by the Coast Guard, the pair's boat was found a year later off the coast of Bermuda, but the boys were never seen again. And there's plenty more stories where these came from, which is why I can't write off the Bermuda Triangle as a simple coincidence area. Trust me, I'd be here all day if we went through all of them. In ninth place, we have Stonehenge. Anyone want to guess what this might be if you don't already know? Yep, a big pile of rocks. How'd you guess? So Stonehenge is a prehistoric monument located on Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire, England. It consists of an outer ring of vertical standing stones, each around 13 feet high, 7 feet wide, and weighing around 25 tons, topped by connecting horizontal stones. Inside is a ring of smaller blue stones, and past those are freestanding trilithons, which are two bulkier vertical stones joined by a connecting horizontal stone. Archaeologists believe that Stonehenge was constructed around 3000 BC to 2000 BC. And now that I've gotten the factual mumbo jumbo out of the way, here's the fun mystery. Stonehenge was produced by a culture that left no written records. Most aspects, such as how it was built and for what purposes it was used, remain subject to debate and many myths. There is little or no direct evidence revealing the construction techniques used by the builders. Over the years, various researchers have suggested that supernatural or anachronistic methods were used, usually asserting that the stones were impossible to move otherwise due to their massive size. In 8th place, we have the Great Library of Alexandria. Located in Egypt, it was one of the largest and most significant libraries of the ancient world. The library acquired many papyrus scrolls, owing largely to the Ptolemaic king's aggressive and well-funded policies for procuring texts. It is unknown exactly just how many scrolls were housed at any given time, but estimates range from 40 to 400,000 at its height. Alexandria came to be regarded as the capital of knowledge and learning, in part because of the Great Library. Many important and influential scholars worked at the library during the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, including Callimachus, who wrote the Pentateuch, considered to be the world's first library catalog, and Eratosthenes of Cyrene, who calculated the circumference of the Earth within a few hundred kilometers of accuracy. Between 270 and 275 AD, the city of Alexandria saw a Ptolemaic invasion and an imperial counterattack that completely destroyed the library. The Serapeum, which was the daughter library, was vandalized and demolished in 391 AD under a decree issued by Bishop Theophilus of Alexandria, and with that, all of the knowledge that was in this library was lost forever. Researchers have tried valiantly to recover what could have existed in this vast library of knowledge, but the unknown looms over all of us. In 7th place, we have the sunken city of Dwarka. Until roughly 50 years ago, it was simply a legend, nothing more. A marine scientist discovered the remnants of the underwater civilization near the coast of Dwarka, the city that's still on land that is, in the 1970s. And in 2002, scientists discovered an extremely advanced civilization from the past, lying untouched just beneath the ocean's surface. Thanks to carbon testing, it was established that the city is anywhere between 7,000 to 9,500 years old and stretches out 7 to 8 kilometers long and about 3 to 4 kilometers in width. The most fascinating, or creepy thing about this underwater city, depending on your point of view, is that all the human remains are still intact. During the 2002 excavation of the Orca, many mud vessels, temple bells, ancient ritualistic vessels, and other artifacts were found, with the carbon dating indicating that they date back to roughly 7200 BC, otherwise known as the prehistoric period. At the time of this research, scientists also found a massive man-made wall that's almost 2,000 feet tall that has since been unearthed during periods of low tide and can somewhat be easily seen now. It'll be fascinating to see if we ever learn about how the city was built, or scientifically what led to the submerging and historical loss of the location outside of mythology. In sixth place, we have the death of Sir Harry Oakes. As someone who grew up visiting one of his former homes, now the Museum of Northern History, I knew I couldn't leave him off my list. Sir Harry earned his fortune in Canada and moved to the Bahamas in the 1930s for tax evasion purposes. He arrived in Kirkland Lake in northeastern Ontario, Canada on June 19th of 1911, and in September of that same year, he registered the transfer of claim T1663, purchased from George Miniker, and established Lakeshore Mine. 20 years later, the gold mine was the most productive in the Western Hemisphere, and it ultimately proved to be the second largest gold mine in the Americas. It's no longer in operation, but plenty of other gold mines around the Kirkland Lake area are. On the evening of July 8th of 1943, while living in the Bahamas, shortly after midnight, Harry had his life brutally ended. He was struck 4 times behind the left ear with a miner's handpick to disguise the wounds from a silver ice pick, and was then burned all over his body using insecticide, with the flames being concentrated around the eyes. And here's where it gets really weird. His body was then sprinkled with feathers from a mattress. When he was discovered, the feathers were still being gently blown over his body by the bedroom fan. The Bahamas governor, the Duke of Windsor, who had become a close friend of Harry's during the previous 3 years, took charge of the investigation from the get-go, inviting 2 American policemen he knew from Miami to take over the case instead of the locals. The 2 American policemen had forgotten their fingerprint kits in Miami, but conveniently, the local Bahamas police force had fingerprint kits available in Nassau. By evening time on the second day of the investigation, 36 hours after his body had been discovered, they had arrested his son-in-law, Count Alfred de Marigny. Count Alfred was on bad terms with Harry, due to his playboy manners and lack of a meaningful career, and the fact that he had been married twice before for short periods to a wealthy woman, and that he had not asked Harry's permission to marry his daughter Nancy. Alfred was acquitted in a trial that lasted several weeks after the detectives were suspected of fabricating evidence against him. The chief piece of evidence was a fingerprint of his, which one of the officers claimed had been found on a Chinese screen in Oakes' bedroom where the body had been found. It was later discovered that the print had been lifted from the water glass that Alfred had used during his questioning by the Miami police captains. So, who killed Sir Harry Oakes? The theories that have emerged since 1943 have ranged from a killer reappearing from Oakes' Canadian past, to a rage-filled secret lover, to a hitman sent by mobster Meyer Lansky. Make of that what you will. There's a lot of really fun books out there about it.
Number 5, no soap. Look, sometimes you're in a rush, you don't have time to shower, so you do the classic Axe body spray X, you know? The old 1-2. Do you remember that, Chris? Oh, yeah. It was so cold too on the armpits. Yeah, like, no wonder I can't grow armpit hair. I've been spraying like aerosol, I've been spraying spray paint on my armpits every morning since I was like 9. I still use it sometimes. Axe chocolate, no contest, so good. Ancient Romans, they were way ahead of the game. They didn't clean their clothes with laundry detergent like I mentioned earlier. It's not shocking to hear that they also didn't use soap to wash their bodies. No, instead, they rubbed perfume oil all over themselves to get rid of sweat and all that jazz. But later on, once said oil had dried up, they then removed it with a wooden wedge or spatula, a tool called a strigil, and they just peel it off. I kind of like that idea. Whenever I burn in the summer, I'm like, ooh, let me peel this neck slowly. It's the world's most painful loofah, essentially. Dirt and sweat would get stuck to this oil and then subsequently peeled off. So it worked, but it took a little more time than our showers nowadays. For Romans who were well off, this of course was a whole event. There were several, assistants. You could pick all these fancy fragrant oils. It was slow and sensual. It was like fun, dare I say. How is anybody ever on time? Like, oh, sorry, I was late. Those oil baths had to stick around for 4 hours this morning and get peeled. It's crazy. Number 4, Roman art. This one reminds me of Superbad a lot, and you'll understand why. Back in the 18th century, when excavations took place in the city of Pompeii, they found lots and lots of art, all with a similar theme. Everything looked like a certain body part. An eggplant-ish theme. There were carvings in the streets, there were carvings of these things in the walls, under a street sign, you name it. They're just everywhere. Just rich history carved in all over. We're still finding these today. They're called the phalluses of Pompeii, yeah. Imagine tripping over one of these. Then you do that thing where you look back to see what you almost rolled your ankle on. You look back and see that, you're like, oh, what? some dude in Pompeii got you like thousands of years ago. Just chiseling out a... Many tour guides like to say that they all point and lead to a brothel, when in reality, that's a lie. These were all just for good luck. These symbols were to ward off the evil eye. Most folks kept these outside the front of their homes, right next to the mailbox. Coming with mail, you're like... Number 3, animals in the Colosseum. In order to spice up the classic fight and clash swords till someone's not alive anymore, sometimes gladiators would be put in the arena with an animal instead of another human being to, you know, spice it up, just to spice up those Saturday night shows, I guess. People are crazy. Were they squirrels? Or were they tigers, elephants, bears, leopards, lions, hyenas, or wolves? The latter. It was all the scary big animals. Animals were very expensive, so they weren't used every day, but the organizers of these battles would go all out for the fights that did include them. Everyone would pile in. It's kind of like Logan Paul versus Mayweather, you know, these big social events. We're like, well, what else are we doing, you know? Let's go watch. Most animals that were used in these great battles unfortunately didn't make it out alive. That's the horrible part. I'm a big animal lover, so that's hard to read. This led to other important factors down the road. People loved when animals were included, that eventually trade in exotic animals took place. That's where it all started. This quickly took the hippo from the Nile, for example, and then made them extinct. That's how they did that. Cut to today, thousands of species are going extinct more and more. You know what, let's just bring gladiators back, let's just do it. UFC, put them in armor, let's just see what happens. That'd be hilarious. Release all the animals from zoos and then bring back just gladiators. Life will be fixed. Number 2, naval battles. Have you ever heard about staged naval battles in the Colosseum? It's a weird spectacle, but it wouldn't have been that crazy. It sounds a lot bigger and more lavish than it really was. The Colosseum was flooded at this point, which I'm sure took a hot minute, and then these ships would come out, and then it would be like medieval times almost, but with a splash zone. A really dirty splash zone. These ships were designed to resemble vessels from famous battles before, but the bottom of the ship was flat, right? These were fake boats, obviously. The water was only 5 feet deep, so obviously they couldn't use, you know, real ships or anything like that. It was all show. It wasn't always violent reenactments either though, as funny as that sounds when you think of the Roman Colosseum. Sometimes they would fill the Colosseum and have nude, synchronized swimmers as a show. Imagine that, imagine traveling the land and then you get there, you're like, oh, let's watch some action, and it's just like ballet, and they're like, oh, this is actually quite nice, I like this a lot. Yeah, also goggles weren't invented until the 14th century, so they had to swim underwater like, oh, this is so gross, their poor eyes. These naval stories were doing so well that Emperor Domitian devoted an entire lake to them now, like the Goblet of Fire. People would walk to a lake to watch these insane shows. Only once the shows moved over there permanently, they then used the Colosseum's old floodgates to hide those animals in. So it was, you know, we love upgrades, I guess. It sucks. It's all bad. And finally, number 1, audience troubles. Okay, what's it like watching these ancient Colosseum shows? Was it fun? Was it horrifying to watch? Were you... like, the PTSD from these shows alone. When the Colosseum was built in 80 AD, about 50 to 80,000 fans of Roman combat would pour in often. The energy is high. This was their only entertainment. They weren't watching The Witcher Season 3, you know what I mean? Some fans would get so into the action that they of course would heckle, like we do nowadays with like UFC. People would be watching like, oh, throw the right hook, throw this thing. They would obviously do the same. But in Roman Colosseum days, you didn't get a warning if you heckled, you know what I mean? One of Rome's more violent emperors, Domitian, who I mentioned earlier, he was pretty diehard about the Colosseum and their games. So much so that one day, a guy in the crowd was heckling a gladiator so much, he was probably, you know, talking smack about his oiled up abs or something like that. So Emperor Domitian had him pulled from the audience to the center of the arena. And then he had to fight to survive. He didn't get out alive, obviously. It was all bad. So yeah, don't huckle. Don't huckle? Don't huckle or heckle. Don't huckle or heckle or heckle. How terrifying is that? Can you imagine heckling and then getting called out? Ancient Colosseum times. Hey Maximus, smile. Me?
We're gonna start with the classic, Who's My Mummy? Around the year 1341 BC, a royal child is born by the name of Tut-Mahaten, the living image of Aten. Sometime after Dad's death, Tut rebrands to Tut-Mahan. This is because his dad is the legendary dumbass Akhenaten who tries to force monotheism. Anyways, some scholars believe that Tut's mom was Ak's principal wife, Nefertiti, but others believe his mother was the secondary wife named Kia. But with either theory, we run into the issue that it's not entirely certain that Ak was even Tut's father. Getting cheated on by both wives, that's when you know you're doing something wrong. It's quite possible that Tut's father was the pharaoh Smun-Akhara. While DNA tests of several mummies found in the Valley of Kings seem to indicate that that Tut's father and mother are buried not far. Egyptologist Marianne Eaton Cross also points out that whereas these mummies are very clearly close relatives of Tut, it's actually difficult to establish precise familiar relationships using only DNA. Egyptian royal families like to preserve the bloodlines, so his mom could also biologically be his sister and cousin, and all of that would show up as an indecipherable mix that does nothing to confirm more than just a relation. If it is Nefertiti, the question remains, where's my mummy? In more recent years, speculation about King Tut's tomb is that Queen Nefertiti, whose tomb and sarcophagus are long lost to us, is buried somewhere within. This claim is made by Egyptologist Nicholas Reeve, who realized that the cartouches depicting Tut had been buried by his pharaonic successor Ai had been painted over cartouches of Tut burying Nefertiti. Reeve said close inspection of Ai's cartouches revealed clear underlying traces of an earlier name, that of Tut. In its original version, this scene had shown Tut performing the funerary rite over the tomb's original owner, his immediate predecessor Nefertiti. The new evidence, specifically the north and east walls of the treasury being man-made structure whilst everything else is cut stone, does support the theory that Tut's tomb is only an outer section of a much larger tomb prepared for and still occupied by Nefertiti, whose own independent sequence of funerary chambers lies beyond. It would also add context as to why the king had such a small, oddly shaped burial chamber. But if someone does lay beyond those walls and it's not Nefertiti, then knock knock, who's there? Few scholars share Reeve's optimism that any new chambers contain Nefertiti's tomb. There's something about her specifically that fills archaeologists with dread and defeat, like she's the popular hot girl at school who would never look at them. The desire to find her mummy is potent, as it would be a tremendous discovery and greatly contribute to the study of ancient Egypt. Frank Raheel of the University of Zurich compiled a list of other royal relatives that he felt could be interred there, including Tut's older sister, Mary Hatton, his possible mother Kia, and of course Smenkahera. There is a belief, however, that if it is Smen, while Nefertiti died, Tut had her interred with him. Possibly because, as mentioned, the dude could be his dad, but also maybe Tut knew his mom loved this guy more than Ak. I don't know, I don't got time for ancient Egyptian Kardashian drama right now. All I'm saying is Tut could have cracked that tomb open, buried Nefertiti, closed it back up, and when he died he got buried in the frontmost room. But to appeal to my ancient alien theorists, is it alien matter? On the flip side of educated leaps, we have alien conspiracy. Egypt's own antiquities ministry announced a few years ago that there were signs of extraterrestrial activity discovered after some radar scans of King Tut's tomb. The radar scans, according to French archaeologist Avril Sapp, refuted theories that Queen Nefertiti's tomb is hidden beyond that of King Tut, and instead revealed weird and extraterrestrial material appeared to resemble a body. However, both Sapp and unnamed antiquity officials refused to answer questions concerning whether or not it could be alien remains. But the AO did confidently boast they could not even come up with something like this in the National Treasure or Indiana Jones movies. This is revolutionary. We don't know what there is, but we've never seen results like this before, said Sapp, who coincidentally discovered dinosaur bones in the Pyramid of Giza a few years ago on April 1st, 2014. Whatever's inside of there could hold secrets to everything behind ancient Egyptian history and technology. Egypt will continue to conduct radar testings and scannings to determine how to enter the hidden chamber without damaging anything inside. Next on the roster, how do you die? One important question that's likely never going to be answered by anything that might be contained in newly discovered chambers is how Tut died. Let's run through some of the many options, shall we? Was it A, King Tut's knee was broken so badly that it was a compound, the bone piercing the skin and causing massive bleeding? Although a fatal leg fracture fits the idea that Tut had died abruptly, it cannot be stated for medical certainty that the fracture occurred while Tut was alive. It's possible his knee was broken after death. Was it B, Tut's death was caused by an infection that resulted from said fracture? Not the result of a chariot crash, by the way, since Tut's physical impairments would have made chariot racing impossible. His immune system was weakened from several bouts of malaria. But maybe it was C, Tut may have been killed by an elderly chief advisor and successor Ai. An x-ray of his skull revealed calcified blood clot at the base, and it could have been caused by a blow from a blunt instrument. Or maybe it's D. New analysis of CT scans from 03 show Tut was embalmed without his heart and anterior chest wall, structures that couldn't have been removed by tomb robbers or anyone else. The assumed cause was an extensive crushing and tearing injury like the bite of a hippopotamus.
Number 5. Sneaking back in. The pair became lovers, and it may have been love at first sight. Remember Caesar's really cool nickname? Well, Cleopatra had some wild methods herself. You know, believing she was the goddess Isis, she tried to appear as the goddess on the regular, so she was committed. She made these dazzling entrances whenever she could, but in 48 BC, right when Caesar arrived in Alexandria, during that family feud with Ptolemy Ptolemy VIII, she wanted to meet the Roman general, but she didn't want to be seen, that would cause some drama. So she had herself wrapped up in a linen sack and then personally delivered to Caesar's bedroom, and then unraveled, and out comes boop, boop, Cleopatra. She won the heart of Rome's future dictator, and eventually she regained Egypt's throne. Nice. Her brother wasn't too fond of this alliance, of course, and in the following battle, Ptolemy drowned in the Nile, resulting in Cleopatra's true return to power. Number 4. Watch the throne. Now this sounds like they would rule the world together, or they should have, but you know, Egyptian tradition already set her love life in stone. She had to marry her other brother, Ptolemy the, you guessed it, 9th. Caesar was already married, but that didn't really matter for the bald adulterer now, did it? Cleopatra and Julius did have a child, and following Caesar's assassination in 44 BC, Cleopatra had her brother, husband, and co-ruler killed. She's just taken out all of her family, this is crazy. But she did so to ensure that her own son, with Caesar, appropriately named Caesarion, would be the next in line for power. Her sister as well, she had a hand in her execution, Arsinoe. Doesn't matter if you're family or not, if you're a threat to her throne, you're getting diced. Number 3. Caesar and Mark Antony. We need to dive into detail about Caesar's death and what happened with Mark Antony. So when Cleopatra originally took Caesar's hand in 46 BC, it wasn't exactly chill. Caesar was very vocal about the fact that Cleopatra was his other lady, his other boo, and at one point Cleopatra and their son, Caesarion, came to visit him in the city, and he was pumped. He had the statue for her built right in the temple of the Venus Genetrix, and Romans were obviously upset, to say the least. They ended up stabbing Caesar to death in the Roman Senate in 44 BC, so just a couple of years after that. Her time with Caesar had long-term effects on the Romans, so women started to dress like her, so much so that now we're misidentifying Cleopatra's body many times over and over again because of this exact reason. Later in 41 BC, she met Mark Antony, and again, she made a dazzling entrance. She arrived on a golden barge equipped with oars made of pure silver and massive purple sails. You would see her coming. She was emulating a different goddess. This time around, she was going for the Aphrodite look, with attendants dressed up as Cupid fanning her down. So extra, what a diva. Well, not really a diva, rather what a planner, because Mark considered himself the embodiment of the Greek god Dionysus. 41 BC, their love life had now ignited, and again, she was being used for her riches, and he was being used to protect her crown. They lived a comfortable life full of lust and leisure for a bit. They actually made their own club, a drinking club named the Inimitable Livers. This was from 41 to 40 BC, and members of the club would partake in all these feasts and games, just wine everywhere, and after a few drinks, Cleopatra and Antony would disguise themselves and then go into the streets of Alexandria and prank locals. That's like when James Corden does the crosswalk musical thing, only I'd definitely rather watch these two. Number 2, her death. In 30 BC, Cleopatra and Antony took their own lives. This happened right after Octavian forces followed them to Alexandria. Now, one of the biggest questions to this day is just how Cleopatra herself met her fate. Now, it's been rumored for a while that a snake bite was the culprit. Cleopatra apparently allowed a poisonous snake to end her life, or was it something entirely different? Was she ahead of the game here too? Instead of a bite from an asp, Greek and Roman historians believe that she did even more here. It's theorized that she poisoned herself using toxins, and she herself administered the poison using a hairpin. So Antony fell onto his own sword, and Cleopatra poked herself with poison. Even the way these historical figures went out aligns with their personality and leadership. Because like I said off the top, Cleopatra was brilliant, specifically in chemistry. Nobody really knows, but this theory of her poisoning herself definitely checks out. But where's the body? Number 1, her tomb. So her death is one thing, but cut to today, we're preserving as much as we can about ancient Egyptians. We're trying to learn more. Ramses II literally got a legal passport thousands of years after he died because officials felt bad marking the mummy as luggage. We're literally digging up the past to find her tomb now. The last queen of Egypt has been lost for over 2,000 years, and we might be getting close to finding her, maybe. There's a site called Taposiris Magna. It's about 30 miles west of Alexandria, and for about 15 years now, excavation teams have been carefully finding remains that date back to that time, that go back to 30 BC. They found coins that were created during her ruling, so we're getting close. There's of course many who believe we're not getting close at all and that we'll never find her. And they're party poopers, but they also may have a valid theory. Many scholars believe the queen was buried inside Alexandria, but that many years ago, it's possible she's now underwater. Due to coastal erosion, there's a section of Cleopatra's palace that is now underwater, so it really is up to chance. Kicking off the list at number 10. the first zoo. Long before the pyramids were even built, Egyptians were getting quite creative. They were the first to see a petting zoo. How brave is that, if anything? Yeah, let's just start touching animals and then see what happens. Let's do it. 6,000 years ago, Hierakonpolis was the capital of Upper Egypt during the pre-dynastic period. It was beautiful. It was sitting alongside the Nile River, which was even more beautiful back then, you can't even imagine. And in those days, perhaps the best way to flaunt your wealth was by getting an exotic pet. Yeah, the old Mike Tyson trick. There were excavations done back in the late 19th century by English archaeologists James Quibble and Frederick Green, and they discovered that this town was once thriving with over 10,000 residents. It's a lot of people. It's a lot more people than we ever thought. That alone is amazing. That's a historical feat. But when further studies were performed, they also found the remains of an elephant surrounded in cosmetics, surrounded in ivory bracelets and amethyst beads, the whole glorious, you name it. A worshipped elephant. That's odd. Then they found the remains of cats and dogs, also worshipped. The dogs slightly more worshipped. Common pets, some crocodiles, again, brave owners there. There's also hippos, leopards, wild ox. It was a wild time. They were carefully buried, but the broken bones suggested a cruel history sometimes. But most of the times, they were pets. Not as bad as we thought there. I'm like, oh, ancient pets? No, they're good. A lot of ivory. Number 9. King Tut's passing. Perhaps one of the greatest mysteries is of course the history of the young King Tut. Younger than we remember, honestly. The young boy became pharaoh at just age 9 in 1332 BC. Yeah, what were you doing at age 9? I was mini golfing. Maybe. I don't even know. During his time ruling, the young king had to face a country in conflict. Egypt and Nubia at this point were going head to head over land, and not even 10 years into ruling, the young pharaoh passed away at age 18. It wasn't until 1922 until he was ever seen again. That's when Howard Carter, of course, discovered the tomb of the lost king, appropriately in the Valley of the Kings. This is where we could have been more careful, historically, because when Tut was discovered, they tried to move his body out of the oil that coated the coffin. But in doing so, they got a little bit too excited. They didn't really know what they were doing back then, so they damaged him. Yeah, they damaged an ancient king. How brutal is that? So now it's next to impossible to tell what really took his life at such an early age, especially for a king. We have some ideas though. It's not entirely hopeless at this point. It was believed King Tut, after some 3D scans were done, had a broken leg, so he may have fallen off a chariot or something. So if King Tut passed at an early age out of nowhere, hopefully this was the reason why, or else there's another mystery afoot. Number 8, the first peace treaty. The first peace treaty in history ever was back in 1259 BC. Now at this point, ancient Egyptians and the Hittite Empire were fighting over what's now modern-day Syria. This conflict had been lasting for centuries, and finally, come 1274 BC, the Battle of Kadesh was now underway. Of course, there was tons of bloodshed, no clear victor in sight, so what's left to do at this point? For the first time ever, a peace treaty was agreed upon. Ramses II and King Hattusili III both negotiated a peace treaty where both sides would aid each other if perhaps a third party decided to get involved. They saw their resources, they saw that they were lacking on both sides, so like, hey, we have no shot really, let's just team up. A copy of the treaty can now be found in New York above the entrance to the United Nations Security Council chamber. It's also in the Guinness Book of World Records as the oldest peace treaty ever. That's how you know it's official, if you don't believe me. Every 90s kid watching right now is like, oh, really? Amen. That's a fact. That's a true fact right there. Those holographic covers. What a trip. Number 7, board games. I love board games a lot, even Monopoly. I have the patience for it every now and then. But ancient Egyptians, talk about patience, my friends. They also loved board games. They created them. They got that board from time to time. Dogs and Jackals, Mehen and Senet, and 20 Squares. Those are the classics. Mehen was played during the pre-dynastic period, around 2500 BC. Now the goal was to reach the center of this spiral, so we think we're trying to piece it together. The board was a coiled snake almost, pretty creative. Senet was the most popular game of all time. Queen and kings alike would play this one. Senet had a long board with 30 squares painted on it. Now of course the rules are still unknown, still heavily debated, just like Monopoly even today. But we have some ideas how Egyptians played it. 3 rows of 10 squares, the last 5 are decorated, so it's assumed, like everything else in ancient Egypt, that this was themed on the afterlife. Plus, King Tut was buried with one of these boards. I'm gonna be buried with a GameCube or something like that. There's also some paintings of Queen Nefertiti playing Senet, so that's how you know it's a good one. It looks a lot like chess. Imagine playing a pharaoh in chess. God, I'd be so anxious. I'd be so nerve-wracking. I wouldn't even play checkers with a pharaoh. That'd be too scary. I'm bad at checkers and chess. I don't know how to play chess. I'm lying to you guys. I've never played chess. I don't know how to. Number 6, Akhenaten. This queen was ruling during the 18th dynasty of Egypt. The pharaoh Akhenaten, well, this was his daughter. She followed in her father's footsteps and was a great ruler, but she was also the wife and half-brother of one King Tut. A pretty conflicted spot to be in historically. Her and King Tut had the same father, but their mothers were different. Now after Tut's death, however, it's believed this queen may have married the pharaoh Ai shortly after, and perhaps she's buried near him right now in the Valley of the the kings. Back in 2010, DNA testing was being done in tomb KB21, and there were 2 18th dynasty queens that were recovered from that tomb in the Valley of the Kings. Could it be? Perhaps? There wasn't enough data that was found from the mummy, but they do know that the DNA is somewhat of an 18th dynasty royal bloodline, so we're definitely close. In another tomb, tomb KB63, numerous coffins were found, and one had an imprint of a woman on it, along with jewelry, women's clothing at the time, but the biggest clue really at this point was pottery fragments. Of course, it's always in the pottery. We've all played Ocarina of Time, always check the pots. The name Potton was on one of these pottery fragments. That's another clue. The only person to ever use this name historically was the long lost queen of Akhenaten. So now we're getting real close, dangerously close. But it feels weird to watch so many tombs be opened up at this point. Like, yeah, we're getting close to finding out things historically, but can we just leave these leading ladies alone? I feel like they dealt with enough men in their lifetime. Now we're just like, we're like, hey, is that her? Nope, we're good. It's like, let them rest. They have fake doors. They don't want us coming in.
At number 5, unfinished. From what we've learned about Leonardo da Vinci, he seemed like the type of person who marched to the beat of his own drum. He did whatever he wanted, when he wanted, and no one could tell him otherwise. Or at least that's how I perceive him anyway. But I think that this perception of him could also be backed up by the fact that he apparently rarely ever finished his work. Apparently, Da Vinci was known to leave commissions and his own personal works unfinished. He was a meh, not really feeling this one right now kind of guy. Turns out the Mona Lisa was actually a commissioned project from a wealthy silk merchant to the Medici, and he never received the painting. Some of Da Vinci's other works, like the Sforza horse monument and the Battle of Anghiari mural, were also abandoned and never completed by the artist. As you can imagine, his clients would often hound and harass Leonardo for the completed pieces that he often never even started. He got so tired of painting later in life that he said that he could not even bear the sight of a paintbrush. I have to say, I kind of feel bad for the people who never got their commission pieces, because I'm sure they would have been quite incredible. At number 4, Salvator Mundi. Here's another one of Leonardo da Vinci's pieces that is shrouded in mystery. Salvator Mundi is one of da Vinci's paintings that has a lot of unanswered questions. People have wondered about the orb in the painting that's held by Jesus. People who know da Vinci's work notice that there is no refraction in the orb, which is uncharacteristic of da Vinci because he knew all about the physics there. But this mystery opened up a whole new jar of worms and a new question, that is, did Leonardo da Vinci even paint Salvator Mundi? And the answer is actually no. I know, crazy, right? For all these years we thought that this was a Da Vinci original, but it turns out that only about 20% of the painting was actually done by Da Vinci himself. After analyzing the painting's artistic details and painting techniques, it is believed that Leonardo's assistant, Bernardino Luini, was the one to paint the majority of this piece. Luini was a painter in his own right, but his pieces never really fetched as much money as Da Vinci's. Adding to all of this painting drama though, it is believed that Leonardo only completed about 15 paintings in his entire lifetime, so there's something to think about. At number 3, dissection. Much like a lot of thinkers from back in the day, Leonardo da Vinci was curious about anatomy. His studies of anatomy first began as research for his paintings. He wanted to be as accurate to the human form as possible, and apparently he was quite a stickler about that. But later on, that research turned into a full-blown fascination for da Vinci. He went from merely researching anatomy to seeking a deeper understanding of the physiology of living things. As part of his research, Leonardo da Vinci was known to dissect human and animal bodies. He was fascinated by physiology, and there was no limits to how far he would go out of curiosity. He was known to have removed a human eyeball and sliced it open to better understand its function and how it worked. Quite strange, but clearly it helped him out in his art, so as long as the people he was dissecting had already kicked the bucket, then all power to you, Leo. At number 2, where is Leonardo? One of the biggest mysteries about the end of Leonardo da Vinci's life is, where the heck is he? No one really knows what happened to the famed painter's remains. His tomb no longer exists, and his bones are nowhere to be found. When he died, he was buried at the Church of Saint Florentin in Amboise, France, but in the early 1800s, after years of erosion and revolutionary vandalism, the chapel needed to be repaired, and they used gravestones and tombstones to repair the building. Children were known to play with the abandoned bones from the graveyard, and so a gardener gathered the bones and buried them. None of the remains have really ever been pieced together, so they remain lost. It is believed that Leonardo's remains could have ended up in the castle of Amboise, but we don't really know if they're actually his remains or not. And finally, at number 1, ciphers and encryptions. Leonardo da Vinci created a lot of mysteries for us to solve in modern day, but he was quite the mysterious man himself because he was known to use codes and encryptions. All of his notes were written backwards with a mirror, and though it isn't known for certain why he did this, many believe that it was to protect his inventions and other notes from falling into the wrong hands. Though it's a pretty easy encryption to figure out, to the average wandering person, the notes would have just looked like gibberish. Other people believe that he wrote everything backwards because he was left-handed and it was just easier for him to write backwards. Leonardo just did everything differently, which made him a little weird to some, but a genius to many others.
Kicking off the list at number 10, gladiator blood. Okay, nice and thirsty this morning, so let's talk about gladiator blood so we can get nice and hydrated for this video. When Charlie Sheen started talking smack about drinking dragon blood, everybody looked at him like this guy was insane. But back then, back in ancient Roman days, if you boasted about drinking gladiator blood, that's great, you were on the right track. Something's working for you, pal. Keep it up. Ancient Romans believed that gladiators had the literal heart of a lion, and to be fair, they were in immaculate shape and they looked like lions with their glorious hair. I'm attracted to Romans, most of them. So the thought process here, being extremely superstitious, was that if you drank said gladiator blood, whatever disease you had would soon be cured. Yes, the strong heart of a lion blood. Yeah, if you have some epilepsy, Roman physicians would tell you to drink some blood, like you're a vampire. Yeah, here you go. Here you go, Edward. Enjoy. Hope you feel better. Number 9, you're in trouble. Recently, we did a list on dark medical practices used in history, and in that list, we mentioned briefly about how urine was used by ancient Romans to whiten their smile. Yeah, fresh breath, not guaranteed, actually, this time at all. It's really not. It's the opposite, in fact. Well, to dive deeper into this gross, disgusting fact, ancient Romans also used urine to wash their clothes. Yep. That's so gross. I was like, I hope no one peeing on them. Here we go. After they were done washing up, they would mask the smell, or at least try to, with leaves. Yeah, they would use bay leaves. Yeah, they didn't use soap because, well, the amount of ammonia in urine did the trick, so there was no need at that point. Yeah. Lye was also used to clean clothes at this time, but it was too pricey. So plan B was to head down to the, washrooms, the old ancient laundromat. Same thing, really, they're pretty close. And then everybody would catch up while, stomping and urinating and cleaning out their clothes. It was a good time. Number 8, new hair, new me. As soon as I cut my hair, I'm not gonna lie, I felt great. There's less weight on the neck, I could be more free in my silly movements when I do these lists. Glowing up these days is easier than ever. The tutorials on YouTube as well, you can learn how to do your brows while hearing true crime. It's amazing what we have nowadays. The Romans, not that easy. They had to do a little more work back then. If you were an ancient Roman and you wanted to show off the new you to your ex, maybe you're at a vomitorium party and you see your ex maybe perhaps, how would you dye your hair? How would you get their attention? How do you show Romulus that blondes do in fact do it better, right? Romans would have to use goat fat and beechwood ashes to bring out those highlights, yeah. Maybe it's goat fat, maybe it's Maybelline, maybe it's disgusting. It's definitely disgusting. Again, like those crazy Roman parties, this was a symbol of status, right? If your hair didn't reek of goat fat, who are you? You're not on the list, honey. Goat fat or bust. I don't speak broke. See ya. Emperor Claudius, his third wife, Valeria, apparently she once dyed her hair blonde and painted her entire body gold, and then had a contest to see who could hook up with the most Romans in one night. Yeah, Bachelor in Paradise, Pompeii edition. Tune in, tonight at 8. Number 7, party hard. The term boot and rally was added to the Urban Dictionary back in 2002, pretty recent. But Romans, they were doing that a long time ago. They were riding that wave out a long time ago. They were ahead of the game. They knew how to get down. All those ancient parties, well, rather, they knew how to get it back up. Ancient Romans would often make themselves throw up in order to continue eating and drinking because it was a social status. Yeah, what would normally be a red flag at a house party was a sign of respect back then. But it was business. These parties were literally business meetings. These long, exhausting banquets, attending these was a sign of social standing. So you wanted to be around the longest. You wanted to drink the most. You wanted to dance the most. And you wanted to, ideally, puke the most. Those are the coolest Romans in town, right? You ever see a Roman gagging? He's getting some stuff done in the city. He's like, excuse me. The solution back then was to throw it up and then continue. So you can, excuse yourself from dinner, go to the vomitorium, right across from the dining room. How convenient. Must be a nice breeze rolling through there, I'm sure. But then you would go to this room, grab a feather, and then tickle, thy throat, and then make room for even more lobster. Yeah, they have a thing that holds feathers. So you just go in and go, oh, a blue one. And then you shove it down your mouth and then put it back in. After you dry it off first, you gotta put it back in. Number 6, bathroom hangouts. Bathroom lighting is key when you go out, okay? Those 1 a.m. selfies have to look good. That's the whole point, or else why are we going out? Why am I putting on shoes, right? The curls aren't working, I'm not going outside, that's it. In ancient Roman times, hanging out in the bathroom with your friends was common. They didn't have any neon lights or anything cool, they didn't have Arctic monkeys playing or any cool atmospheres. It was just a lot of bricks, and also it of course smelled really bad. They didn't have the Charmin Ultra less is more lifestyle either. They had to use sticks with sponges to wipe. And yeah, they also, same with the feathers, they had to share said sticks. Socializing in these ancient toilets was like socializing at a Starbucks. It was normal, it was business, you know, you would spend hours here and you got stuff done. Groups of Romans would discuss business, politics, military strategies, you name it. All the while there's a dude in the corner just taking a shit. Romans believed the goddess Glaucina was the guardian of the toilet drain system. Glauca Maxima translates to big drain. So when you invent the flushing toilet, yeah, you're like, this is some higher power. You can call your toilets whatever you want, you know? Just maybe don't call any more meetings there, because it smells a little bad. Number 5. Original plans. Another theory that surrounds the queen is that King Tut's chamber was actually meant for her. Yeah, listen to this. The former antiquities minister doesn't believe this. He strongly stands by his belief that the lost queen was one of the female mummies found in the Valley of the Kings. What's compelling here though is that King Tut passed away at age 19, so many believe his own burial chamber hadn't even been built yet, or finished at least. So instead, they used hers. But a radar survey around the tomb in the Valley of the Kings shows us this hidden chamber behind the north wall of the burial chamber. It's been said before that King Tut's chamber was way too small and there must be more. His stepmom being buried in the same tomb, well, that's certainly a start. We're on to something. Number 4, tomb alignment. Nobody knows angles like ancient Egyptians. The way they built the pyramids, I mean, they still stand today confidently. We're trying to figure out just how they made the pyramids in the first place. Meanwhile, there's a team inside the pyramids trying to figure out who is even buried in the walls. It's a whole fascinating mystery. Using ground-penetrating radar, researchers were able to find this corridor, this log opening in the bedrock at the exact same depth of King Tut's chamber. And on top of that, these openings are facing the same direction. Tomb KV62 and this new chamber have the same orientation, so of course we're going to believe that they're connected. Because unconnected tombs don't often align, or don't ever align really, so that's also a sign. We're getting close. Let's just give me a shovel, I'll get in there, I'll help out. Be so gentle with everything. I'll feather things off. I've seen National Treasure. Number 3, brief ruling. The queen was the stepmother of King Tut. Her daughter was married to King Tut, so there's a handful of Egyptologists that believe that right before King Tut's ruling in the 14th century, there was this really small window where Nefertiti ruled as pharaoh. There's also a great deal of historians that believe Nefertiti was no ruler to her husband, King Akhenaten, but we don't have enough evidence quite yet to really know what happened. Hence why we're doing a mystery video on the long lost queen. Now we get it. The reason we're adamant on finding everything we can is because she literally changed Egyptian religion. Number 2, her family. The queen's name translates to a beautiful woman has come, and given the fact that we still don't know her parentage, we have to use our national treasure brains here. A beautiful woman has come. Come from where? Well, early Egyptologists believe that Queen Nefertiti came from Syria. Back then, it was Mitanni. Her family roots are still debatable, but there's reason to believe that Nefertiti was actually Egyptian born. In fact, many believe she's related to King Akhenaten. We don't really know. The lost queen did have children of her own. She had 6 daughters, like I mentioned before, 2 of which became queens of Egypt. She may have also been the daughter of A, who at the time was an advisor for the king, and ended up becoming pharaoh after King Tut's death in 1323. So we have no idea, but we're getting so close. I feel like we're like years away from finding everything we need to know, but also this last point is pretty interesting. Number 1, sun god origins. Okay, one of the most interesting facts about all of this was the religious impact that the queen made on ancient Egypt. Both her and King Akhenaten were in a cult. How fascinating is that? They were in the cult of the sun god Aton. In the earliest accounts of the queen, she assisted her husband in a ritual that smited the female enemies of Egypt at the time. There have been a few blocks that have since been recovered from the Theban tombs of the royal butler that depicts the queen wearing her unique blue crown, so definitely her, part of these sun god rituals. So cut to the end of the king's ruling, the Aton was now Egypt's main god. She made a new god. She convinced everyone to believe in a new god. That's incredible. We can't even decide on who's gonna win America's Got Talent. She's like trading in traditions and religions. That's wild.
At number 10, less developed. Back in ancient times, there were so many civilizations around the world who were growing and developing their own customs, tools, and other innovative ideas. Each civilization advanced at their own pace, but when it comes to Mesoamerican civilizations like the Mayans, some have wondered why they weren't as advanced as others from different parts of the world. While the Spaniards, who later colonized many Mesoamerican places, were using guns, the Mayans were still using swords and shields. Many Mesoamerican civilizations never even developed iron tools and stayed using things like stone and obsidian. This is a mystery that has boggled the minds of many researchers. The theory as to why they might not have advanced as much as other civilizations is that it had to do with their environment. To develop a civilization to the level that others around the world had, the advancement of agriculture and animal domestication had to be successful, and because the lands in which the Mayans lived were home to very few native animal and plant species, it made it hard for these people to advance and therefore caused some difficulties for them. At number 9, body modification. The Mayans, much like other Mesoamerican civilizations, were big on body modification. The modification process often started from birth and continued to be a staple in their society for many years. Some of their body modification practices included skull shaping, where they would use wooden planks to alter the shapes of baby skulls, dental modifications, where they would drill holes into their teeth and insert gems like jade and iron pyrite into them, and even tattoos. They also had a lot of piercings in their culture, from earlobe to nose piercings and even tongue piercings as well. Some of the elite members of society would pierce their tongues with a stingray spine and then pull a thorn-freckled or obsidian-crusted vine through it. One of the most intense body modifications that they practiced was forcing their kids to become cross-eyed. From a young age, parents would hang beads from their kids' hair across their foreheads so that their kids' eyes would focus on it, and over time they would become cross-eyed. This was a sign of beauty because they associated the look with the way a jaguar's eyes looked before they attacked their prey. Now, before I carry on talking about these Mayan mysteries, I would first like to ask you guys to leave a like on this video if you're enjoying it so far, and also maybe consider subscribing to the channel to see more videos like this one. At number 8, naming their kids. These days, there are so many ways to name your spawn. There are baby name books and websites. Every year there is a trending list of baby names for parents to choose from, and some even just go with family names for their kids. But back in the days of the ancient Mayan civilization, naming your kid was a very simple process because it just depended on what day the kid was born. The Mayans had a name for every day of their calendar year, so depending on which day you were evicted from the womb, that's the name that you were assigned. That means that there would have been a lot of people in their city with the same name. For boys born in the Mayan civilization, they were just given the name of the day they were born, but for girls, they had to have the number 9 in front of their given name as a sign of feminine power, which I find pretty interesting. Imagine if that was how we name people these days. Based on the Mayan naming system, how many people do you know that might have been given the same name as you? At number 7, sacrifices. The ancient Mayan people were another society who practiced human sacrifices as part of their religious practices. Already, the notion of sacrificing a member of your society to appease the gods sounds pretty gruesome, but when you learn about some of the details of their sacrificial practices, it gets a little scarier and a little mysterious too. In their religion, they would sacrifice people like prisoners, slaves, or even regular everyday people. They would start by painting the sacrificial person blue, and they were sometimes subjected to torture as well, depending on the context of their sacrifice. Then they would be led up to the top of one of their pyramids and either be showered with a volley of arrows or have their heart ripped out through their chest while it was still beating. Talk about heartbreak, right? Yeah? No. Okay. To make things even more gruesome, sometimes the assistant priest at the sacrificial ceremony would then skin the sacrifice, and the head priest would then wear the skin and perform a ritual dance. Yeah, it's super gory and definitely something that I'm glad that I won't have to experience. At number 6, Mayan graffiti. Now here's something really mysterious that I find quite interesting. Turns out that the Mayans did graffiti. Yeah. So next time you're out and you see graffiti in your own city, you can look at that and know that the Mayans did the same thing. The Mayans were obsessed with writing, and so they would write and draw on anything they could, including their own stone walls. Archaeologists have found many etchings in stone in many ancient Mayan cities. These etchings were made by people carving into plaster using stone tools or obsidian, and the graffiti usually depicted things like people, animals, deities, lion carvings, handprints, and other glyphs. At first, when researchers discovered these carvings, they thought that they were made by children who lived in the communities, but after further research, they realized that these markings had more of a purpose rather than just being random drawings. No one really knows why they did graffiti, only that it was just there, which really kind of just adds to the mystery of the whole thing.
Despite not knowing how he died, we know after he did, there was a big ol' succession mess. Post-Tut, the pharaoh plot gets all dicey. Hormuzd was the chosen heir for the throne, and was off waging war against the Hittites. The coup theory for Tut's death revolved around his elderly chief advisor Ai, because we do not know how or why a high official like him came to be king of Egypt otherwise. He definitively stole the crown and throne from Hormuzd in his absence though. Ancient letters suggest that either Nefertiti or, more likely, Tut's widow Akhenaten was desperate to prevent Ai from becoming pharaoh and asked the king of the Hittites, who they are at literal war with, to send a prince who can marry her and rule Egypt. An and Nefertiti are erased from history around that time. During his short reign, King Ai tried in vain to achieve peace with said Hittites, while also simultaneously trying to prevent Hormuzd, the true regent of Tut, from seizing the throne while he's alive and after he died. To do so, he named an heir, an army commander named Nakahimti, who we know as perhaps to be Ai's own grandson. As you can imagine, Nakahimti became Hormuz's great rival, but Ai's successor would finally be Horem when his 3-year reign ends. Horem would then rule for nearly 30 years and then remove all known history of Tut and Taa, Nefertiti, and Tut's father, Ak. Now that's a mystery as to why. And while we're on the topic, where is An? For over 3,000 years, her life has been a mystery to us and mostly made up of bizarre facts and strange omissions. Like that despite being the third daughter of the pharaoh, she was once his wife too, before marrying her half-brother Tut. When Tut died, the corrupt priests chose an heir, General Harambe, known lunatic. Anne was terrified and realized the kingdom was being lost to corruption and secret societies. She potentially writes to the king Hittites during their time of war as mentioned, offering herself and the throne of Egypt to one of his sons. The prince in specific was Zanzania, and he set out for Egypt and is killed before he arrives. Historians believe this was Horemheb's doing. Anne is forced to marry Ai so he can steadfastly secure his place on the throne, and then like that, she vanishes from history, an absence that some historians say signal her death. But it isn't the only time that has fragmented her story. An's role of ancient Egypt's most contentious period was lost deliberately, excised from the annals of history by the new dynasty that rose to power just decades later. DNA testing she may have been one of the female mummies found in Key V21, but for now, she remains shrouded in mystery. The story of the Cobra and Canary is next. Howard Carter, self-taught archaeologist, plunderer, thief, and is responsible for the discovery and opening of King Tut's tomb. Prior to said opening, he had bought a golden canary, hoping its chatter and song would cheer up his empty house. When he first brought it home, one of his housemates tells Carter, "It's a bird of gold that will bring luck. This year we will find a tomb full of gold." Well, howdy doody, either that bird summoned gold or the maid is a fortune teller. Within a week of purchasing the canary, Carter discovers Tut's tomb. And before knowing whose tomb they had found, the workers nicknamed it the Tomb of the Golden Bird, a bird that becomes an omen of what's to come. During the recent excavations which led to the discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun, Mr. Howard Carter had in his house a canary which daily regaled him with its happy song. On the day, however, on which the entrance to the tomb was laid bare, a cobra entered the house, pounced on the bird, and swallowed it. Now, cobras are rare in Egypt and seldom seen in winter, but in ancient times they were regarded as symbol of royalty, and each pharaoh wore the symbol upon his forehead as though to signify his power to strike and sting his enemies. And obviously this segues us to the classic mystery of the mummy's curse. I'm of the opinion anyone who pillages or destroys history deserves to have a curse, so Howard Carter and company, please continue rolling in your graves, bud. You earned this. So, George Herbert funded the excavation and died from blood poisoning days later. Legend has it, when the Lord Carnarvon died, all the lights in his house and in Cairo, Egypt mysteriously went out. Howard Carter gave a mummified hand wearing a bracelet inscribed saying, "Cursed he be who moves my body," to his friend Bruce Ingham as a gift. Ingham that man did not like you. His house burned to the ground not long after, and when he tried to rebuild, it was hit by a flood. George J. Gould dies after one visit. Aubrey Herbert dies of gum rot. Hugh Evelyn White takes his own life, but not before writing in blood, "I have succumbed to the curse which forces me to disappear." Aaron Ember and his whole family dies, and Richard Bethel is suffocated by apparently the Satanist Aleister Crowley of all people. Archibald Douglas Richard died 3 days after X-raying Tut, and then James Henry Breasted dies on his next Egypt trip. Mystery, or what do you think? And last on our list is the alien jewel. The amazing story began 77 years after Carter's discovery, when an Italian geologist noticed something odd about the yellow-green scarab in the pectoral center. The subsequent tests proved that the lump of glass was older than any Egyptian society, a lot older, in fact. Experts trace this scarab back to the Great Sand Sea, 500 miles southwest of Cairo, in which there are known to be huge lumps of glass poking out of the dunes. The general opinion is that a meteor hit the desert hundreds of thousands of years ago, heating the sand enough to create glass. To give you the idea of the magnitude that is supposed impact, the first A/B testing done created a thin frost-like layer of glass in the New Mexico desert. Meanwhile, chunks of glass the size of literal human heads can be picked up from the Great Sand Sea to this day. That means this meteor hit with an impact that we humans can't recreate on a different type of scale. But there's no evidence of a meteor that has ever struck the desert. If this glass is of meteoric origin, then there should be a crater of that age, says Boston University Farouk Al-Baz. But no crater, let alone partially fused or a serial piece, has ever been found. This suggests the less exciting origin, a supersaturated lake of silica that slowly dried into a natural glass hard enough to resist a scalpel mark. What do you think? Mystery glass from aliens or no?
Number 10! We're making a video about mysteries from ancient Rome, and you think I'm not gonna talk about Pompey's own Villa of Mysteries? You balkin', mate, you balkin'! The Villa of Mysteries was discovered back in 1909 after being buried at Pompeii. One of the more mysterious finds was a wall fresco that depicts what could be a play or wedding, or maybe an initiation ceremony to an ancient Roman cult known as the Cult of Dionysus. We don't really know anything about what this cult actually did. They were obviously very good at keeping things under wraps. What happens in the cult stays in the cult. Or however that saying goes, I don't really remember. No one was allowed to know what happened in their initiation, rituals, or really anything. I mean, they weren't even allowed to write it down. But if that was the case, why was someone allowed to paint it on a wall? Make it make sense, bro. Make it make sense. Number 9, family traits. I think this one is kind of really interesting. There is a village in western China where the people who all live here, meaning their families are all historically from here, have blue eyes and blonde hair. While not exactly uncommon, I guess, the sheer amount of people specifically from here that have these particular traits that are different from the black hair and dark eye color of most people in China suggests that everyone who is native to this area may actually be descended from an ancient Roman legion. I have the blood of a legionnaire flowing through these veins! That'd be so cool. In 53 BC, Marcus Crassus lost pretty badly in a fight in what is modern-day Afghanistan. It's believed that the Roman soldiers that survived traveled as mercenaries, just trying to make a few bucks, and they apparently wandered as far as this village in western China. DNA tests on the villagers of this area actually do show that they are 50% Caucasian, which is super interesting, but we don't know for sure if it was these traveling for sale legionnaires that were the cause. And maybe I'm just a silly goose, but I don't even know how we would be able to find that out with some kind of archaeological evidence. Number 8, misleading. In 2010, we discovered a coffin in the city of Gabi. A coffin made of lead. It was also, interestingly enough, in the shape of a burrito, giving it the nickname Lead Burrito. You won't be seeing me going into Chipotle to ask for that one. Yes, I'll take one lead burrito, extra deceased Roman inside, please and thank you. No. The University of Michigan, the ones who led the expedition that found the coffin, said that lead coffins like this are extremely rare. But on top of that, this one specifically is incredibly heavy, like 1,000 pounds, letting us know exactly how expensive it must have been. The mysterious part comes to play when we realize we have absolutely no clue whatsoever who the adult man inside this coffin is. We know he was around at the time of Nero, but there is no evidence inside this burrito about the life this man lived. No extra toppings in this burrito, just lead and meat. Yum. Number 7, the 9th Legion. In ancient Rome, there was a legion that was known to be the best of the best the Romans had to offer. It was known as the 9th Legion. Being the best of the best came with being put into the harshest of areas to fix Rome's problems. So these boys in red were sent to England past Hadrian's Wall, where they would fight against the Picts. But then, they were just never heard from again, ever. Now, the obvious answer here is that they got absolutely demolished by the Picts. The last thing we heard was from the year 108, and we know that the Legion had a pretty brutal surprise attack in Caledonia due to some Roman guards falling asleep on the job, which doesn't really seem like best of the best behavior now, does it? What makes this whole thing really weird is that in 121, there are some bricks that have the seal of the 9th Legion on them, which is about 13 years after their last mention. And on top of that, there is an officer from that legion who shows up as the governor of Arabia in 142. I think these could have just been survivors who were taken out of England after the best of the best went bust. But who knows? Not me. Number 6. Locusta the Poisoner. Nero, you little rascal you. Emperor Nero was known as one of the worst, and he was also known for having a few people, de-lifed. What better way to do that than with poison? The chemist Locusta was the one who became his poison expert, but she's also kind of unfairly known as the world's first serial de-lifer because of that. Kind of unfairly because it could be completely true. We just have no idea. We know from historians at the time that Nero and even his mother liked Locusta so much that he actually helped set her up with a school dedicated to creating new poisons and all kinds of research surrounding poison. But we don't actually have any of that research. There is no proof of any of it. But she was executed by the guy who took on Nero's job after he was gone, and I can't help but think there is a decent reason for that. Maybe because of all the people she poisoned and helped poison? We will never know. Probably. I mean, we could. I don't know.
Number 5. Queen Nefertiti's disappearance. Ruling alongside the pharaoh Akhenaten from 1353 to 1336 BC, Queen Nefertiti, aka Lady of Grace, aka Hereditary Princess, was born in 1370 BC. She was born in the Egyptian city of Thebes. She was only 15 years old when she married 16-year-old Akhenaten. Again, always so young and just forced. This family forced fun. She worshipped the sun god Aten at the time, and alongside her young husband, she built a new capital called Amarna. She even created a new religion. She was onto some good stuff. She ruled over what's now considered the wealthiest period in Egyptian history. Nefertiti had 6 children, which were all daughters. Many believe this has something to do with her disappearance. After reconstructing Egypt's religious and political structure, soaring to new heights as a woman in the Egyptian court, the queen just vanished. Yeah, historically, just like that, boom. During the 12th year of the 17 that her husband ruled for, historical records seem to have just wiped out the queen's side of the legacy. She was gone from everything, and many believe that she didn't actually die, but rather, she disguised herself and continued to rule. See, the next in line after Akhenaten's reign was Pharaoh Smenkhkare. Was that really Nefertiti in disguise? I hope so. That's like some she's the man stuff right there. The reason we believe she may have disguised herself as a man is because of the female pharaoh, Hatshepsut. She ruled with a fake beard in the 15th century, so it's possible, we've seen it. And lastly, there's a theory that the reason Nefertiti was banished was because she couldn't produce a male heir. Like I mentioned, she had 6 daughters and then she disappeared. This is ancient history we're talking about. Always brutal, no matter what. Beautiful, but brutal. Number 4, Cleopatra's. Sure, she may have been born in Egypt, but Cleopatra, despite what many believe, was not Egyptian. She was the last Greek ruler of Egypt, and after Alexander the Great's death in 323 BC, Ptolemy then took over Egypt, which in turn launched this wave, this dynasty of Greek rulers that lasted for centuries. DNA-wise, she was barely Egyptian, but as she grew up, she was determined to learn all about Egyptian culture. And due to political structure, she started to style herself after the goddess Isis. She was the first Cleopatra that claimed to be Isis after the 3rd Cleopatra. Yeah, there's way more than we think. There's like 7. Number 3, King Ramses VIII. The last son of Ramses III. He's the 7th pharaoh of the 20th dynasty. King Ramses VIII. Yeah, history is confusing with these numbers sometimes. I gotta tell you, I had to type that one out a few times. I was like 8, 3rd, carry the 8, 9, Ramses what? The lost king had the throne for a very short amount of time, and historians are trying to understand why that is. What exactly happened? What in the King Joffrey went wrong with King Ramses VIII here? He was the only pharaoh of the 20th dynasty whose tomb is still lost in the Valley of the Kings, so maybe it's not even there. And the thing is, with his Ramses' ruling being so short, the theory out there is that the tomb of KV-19 that belonged to the son of Ramses IX, many believe this tomb was originally built for Ramses VIII, but once he became king, everybody saw his true colors. They must have changed their mind at that point, or changed their lane or something. They were like, maybe not him, you know? There is a confirmed tomb that was never used for Ramses VIII, and that was tomb QV43. That was in the Valley of the Queens. It was made for him, but never used. Again, more mysteries. The poor souls who had to build all these tombs, and they're like, you don't need it? Okay. 57 years to make that tomb. You sure you don't need it? Okay. Number 2, baboon police. Ancient Egyptians worshipped lots of animals. We mentioned that earlier. They had zoos and elephants surrounded in ivory, all that good stuff. At one point or another, you've heard about how cats were highly respected back then, worshipped. But they also worshipped other animals as well. Sorry, cat people. Other animals are fun, like baboons, believe it or not. They were pretty important pieces to this ancient Egyptian puzzle. Egyptians had tattoos of baboons all over them. This was before Harambe, you know, anyone monumental like that ever came around. The most famous piece of history that we have preserved is in the collections of the British Museum in London. There's a mummy on display and it looks a little slightly different than the rest. EA6736, fun name, but he was recovered from the Temple of Cones in Luxor, Egypt. This little man dates back to the New Kingdom period, so anywhere around 1550 BC to 10 BC. Yeah, he's quite old. Baboons would appear in art and religion all over ancient Egypt, and one of my favorite facts ever has to be that in ancient Egyptian times, pharaohs would train baboons to make arrests. Yeah, imagine stealing food and trying to run away, and then you look back and there's 4 baboons doing parkour behind you, telling you to stop resisting, hucking bananas at you. That's crazy. And number 1, false doors. Imagine searching for a lost Egyptian tomb your entire life, alright? Imagine you spent years of your life dedicating everything to this research, and you finally find this door, this ancient door. You find an entrance carved into the wall. This is it. What lies beyond? You try and carefully open it with a team of archaeologists, but it won't budge because it is a fake door, my friends. It is a false door. Yeah, you just got juked out from a guy 4,500 years ago. He's like, gotcha. Took long, we did it. False doors in ancient Egyptian tombs are very common. Ancient Egyptians believed that these false doors were a connection to the dead. How beautiful is that? And that is how spirits were able to travel from here to there, and back and forth. See, most false doors can be found on the west wall because Egyptians believed the west to be the land of the dead. The west. That's the west. Which way? Which way is north? Your west, my east. How does that sound? There we go.